It was a night that would be etched into the memory of Oak Ridge forever. A warm August evening, the streets bathed in the orange glow of sunset, until a second, more sinister glow rose into the sky. At 9:17 p.m., a blaze erupted in the old furniture warehouse on the edge of town. Within minutes, flames clawed their way through the roof, sending a column of black smoke billowing upward. Fire crews arrived quickly, but the heat was overwhelming, and the building, a century-old structure of dry wood, became an inferno. The townspeople gathered at a safe distance, their faces reflecting the flickering light. Some whispered in horror, others stood in silence. And then, someone noticed him, a man standing at the very front of the crowd, his eyes wide, his lips curled into a faint smile. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't shocked. He was watching, almost savoring it. No one knew it yet, but this was the first of many nights that would plunge Oak Ridge into fear. And the man who seemed to enjoy the fire more than anyone else? His name was Caleb Ward. Caleb Ward was 34 years old, a quiet figure in a town where everyone knew each other. He worked odd jobs, handyman work, fixing roofs, painting fences, but never stayed in one place for long. People called him helpful on the surface, but if you asked them later, they would admit something about him felt off. He lived alone in a small house at the end of Mill Creek Road. The yard was overgrown, and the windows were always shut tight. Inside, the curtains stayed drawn, keeping the world out. What nobody knew was that Caleb had been fascinated by fire since he was a boy. As a teenager, he would light small piles of leaves behind his father's shed, watching them curl and blacken as the flames consumed them. It wasn't the destruction that thrilled him, not exactly. It was the control. The idea that with a flick of a lighter, he could create chaos and then stand back, untouched. The warehouse fire, to him, wasn't just a tragedy. It was a masterpiece. The Oak Ridge Fire Department called in Detective Laura Pierce, a state fire investigator known for her persistence. Laura had worked more than 200 arson cases in her career. She could tell, within minutes of arriving at a scene, whether a blaze was an accident or something far more sinister. When she walked through the charred remains of the furniture warehouse the next morning, she noticed something unusual. The burn patterns didn't match an electrical fault. The fire had started in 3 different locations at once. This wasn't an accident, she told the fire chief. Someone wanted this place gone. But Laura didn't just want to find who set the fire. She wanted to know why. Over the next 2 weeks, Oak Ridge saw 2 more suspicious fires. One was a small shed behind the high school. The other, a dumpster blaze outside a grocery store. Each time, firefighters responded quickly and kept the damage contained. And each time, a familiar face was spotted near the scene, Caleb Ward. Witnesses remembered him because he always stood just close enough to feel the heat, his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the flames. Laura started making a list of possible suspects, and Caleb's name rose to the top. But suspicion wasn't proof. She needed to catch him in the act, or find a mistake he couldn't talk his way out of. Laura reached out to Dr. Henry Marlowe, a criminal psychologist specializing in arsonist behavior. Dr. Marlowe explained that many arsonists didn't burn things for money or revenge. They burned them for the emotional rush. For some, he said, watching fire is a form of release. They feel invisible in their daily lives, powerless. But when they start a fire, they hold the ultimate power, to destroy, to create panic, to make the world stop and stare. Laura thought about Caleb, a quiet man, seemingly overlooked by most people. Could he be burning buildings just to feel seen? Caleb's childhood wasn't easy. His father was strict, cold, and quick to anger. His mother left when he was 9. In school, Caleb was awkward and withdrawn. Other kids bullied him for his quietness, calling him mute or ghost boy. One summer, after an especially cruel incident, Caleb disappeared into the woods for hours. When he came back, he smelled faintly of smoke. Later, a barn on the outskirts of town was found burned to the ground. No one connected it to him at the time. From then on, fire became his secret escape. When he lit something, it didn't talk back. It didn't mock him. It didn't leave him. It just obeyed. Late one night, a fire tore through a vacant house near the river. Laura arrived at the scene before the last flames were out. As firefighters worked, she noticed something glinting in the grass a few yards away, a small metal lighter, scratched and dented. It wasn't a cheap plastic one. It was heavy, engraved with the initials CW. Laura bagged it as evidence. It wasn't enough to make an arrest, but it was a crack in the wall Caleb had built around himself. 2 days later, Laura asked Caleb to come in for a few questions. In the small interview room, Caleb sat with his hands folded, his voice calm. "I don't know anything about those fires," he said. "I just live nearby. I like to see what's happening in my town." Laura leaned in. "You don't just see what's happening. You're always there first, before most of the crowd, almost like you know when it's going to start." For the first time, Caleb's eyes flickered, a quick flash of something she couldn't quite read. Laura pored over reports from the last year. She noticed something chilling. Every fire in Oak Ridge had been set within a mile of a location where Caleb had recently been spotted, either working on jobs, shopping, or visiting someone. It was as if he was choosing places that were familiar to him, places where he could blend in when the chaos began. The breaking point came on a windy October night. At 11:45 p.m., flames erupted at the old Ridgeview Apartments, a building still home to over a dozen people. Firefighters raced to evacuate residents. Smoke filled the halls. Children cried as parents rushed them into the cold night air. This wasn't a harmless thrill anymore. Someone could die. And as Laura scanned the crowd, there he was again, Caleb Ward, standing at the front, eyes locked on the burning building. Smiling, the Ridgeview Apartments fire nearly claimed lives. An elderly man on the top floor was found unconscious from smoke inhalation. 2 firefighters carried him out just before the ceiling collapsed. Laura watched the chaos, the flashing lights, the swarm of emergency responders, and Caleb, standing perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the inferno. She wasn't just suspicious anymore. She was certain. But certainty wasn't enough for a courtroom. She needed something solid. A witness. A recording. A mistake. And she had a plan to make him slip. Laura reached out to the state's arson task force. Together, they set up surveillance around several vacant buildings in Oak Ridge, places they suspected Caleb might target next. Unmarked vehicles. Hidden cameras. Motion sensors. They knew his pattern. Strike at night, in a place where he could watch unnoticed, and disappear before the fire was reported. The question was, how long would it take before he couldn't resist lighting another match? For nearly 2 weeks, nothing happened. No fires. No suspicious sightings. Laura started to wonder if Caleb sensed the heat closing in. But then, on the 14th night, an alert came through. Motion detected at the old Franklin Mill, just outside town. The mill was a perfect target, isolated, wooden, and abandoned for decades. Within minutes, Laura was on her way, heart pounding. The footage from the hidden cameras was clear. A man in a dark hoodie walked along the side of the mill, carrying a small red gas can. He poured liquid in several spots before striking a lighter. The flames caught instantly. When the man turned toward the camera, the light from the fire lit his face, unmistakably, Caleb Ward. They had him. Police moved fast. 2 patrol cars intercepted Caleb as he drove away from the mill. He didn't resist. In fact, he seemed almost calm. At the station, Laura read him his rights. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't protest. He just sat there, silent, staring at the table as if the real show was still happening in his mind. Hours later, Laura slid the photos across the table, the stills from the surveillance footage. Caleb glanced at them, then looked up with a faint smile. "I didn't think you'd catch me that soon," he said. He admitted to the mill fire, then the warehouse, then the apartment building. But what chilled Laura was when he leaned forward and whispered, "Those are just the ones you know about." When Laura asked why, Caleb's voice softened, almost like he was explaining a hobby. "You watch the world move every day," he said. "People rushing, working, ignoring each other. Then you light a fire, and everything stops. Everyone looks the same direction. At you. They don't know it's you, but you know." He smiled faintly. "It's beautiful." Caleb began listing fires from years past. A cabin in the hills, a storage barn, a camper by the lake. Some of these incidents had been ruled accidents. Others had no official cause. But each time, Caleb described details only the arsonist would know. Where the flames started, what accelerant he used, how long he stayed to watch. Laura realized the case against him wasn't just about Oak Ridge. It stretched far beyond. Dr. Marlowe was brought in to evaluate Caleb. He concluded Caleb had pyromania, a rare impulse control disorder. It wasn't about money, revenge, or covering a crime. It was about compulsion, an uncontrollable urge, followed by satisfaction when the act was complete. Pyromaniacs often stay to watch their fires, Dr. Marlowe explained. They crave the chaos they've created. For Caleb, The fire was his way of existing in a world that otherwise ignored him. The prosecution had more than enough to charge Caleb with multiple counts of arson, reckless endangerment, and attempted murder. But Laura wanted every possible case linked to him so no doubt would remain. The deeper she dug, the more she uncovered, a trail of flames across 3 counties. And yet, despite the mountain of evidence, Caleb didn't seem afraid. In fact, he seemed excited, as if the trial would be his final fire. When news of Caleb Ward's arrest spread through Oak Ridge, the town was split between shock and anger. Some people swore they had always known something was off about him. Others couldn't reconcile the quiet man who fixed fences and painted porches with the criminal who had endangered so many lives. For the victims of the Ridgeview Apartments fire, the relief was mixed with fury. Caleb had almost cost them everything. And for what? Entertainment? Local news covered the story daily. The phrase fire watcher began appearing in headlines. Caleb's trial began 6 months later. From the moment he walked into the courtroom, he seemed almost proud. He wore a suit, sat with perfect posture, and never broke his faint, unnerving smile. During witness testimony, survivors described the terror of waking up to smoke and flames. Firefighters spoke of risking their lives in buildings he had set ablaze. But Caleb? He listened as though they were telling ghost stories, stories he already knew the ending to. When Laura took the stand, the prosecution asked her to describe how Caleb had been caught. She detailed the surveillance operation, the footage, and his confession. The defense tried to argue that Caleb had a mental disorder and should be placed in a treatment facility instead of prison. But Laura's testimony painted him not as a man who couldn't control himself, but as one who chose to indulge his obsession, knowing full well the risk to human life. On the last day of the trial, Caleb requested to speak. He rose, looked around the courtroom, and said in a calm voice, "You all think you caught me. But the truth is, I lit fires you'll never find. Places you'll never look. Some of them are gone forever, and only I remember them. That's my gift and my curse." The judge ordered his statement stricken from the record, but the damage was done. The jury had seen the lack of remorse in his eyes. Caleb Ward was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The judge called his crimes a calculated campaign of destruction fueled by vanity and disregard for human life. Even behind bars, Caleb maintained his strange calm. "They can lock me up," he told reporters, "but the fires I've lit will always burn in my mind." For Oak Ridge, the wounds would take years to heal. The old warehouse lot remained empty, a silent reminder of the night their town's peace went up in flames. Cases like this remind us that danger doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes it's the quiet neighbor, the familiar face in the crowd. What do you think drives someone like Caleb Ward? Is it purely psychological, or something darker? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the minds of criminals, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story.